G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to IL2 Sturmovik, the Battle of Stalingrad, or more to the point, the Battle of Moscow Early Access. I first announced I was going to be doing this video 3 weeks ago, and I fell way behind. A couple of personal life events, a couple of new game releases that I wanted to check out, but most of all was actually trying to get comfortable with this aircraft. As a general rule, I can jump into a plane, and it only usually takes a few hours, and I'm comfortable with its flight. I may not be super proficient in its combat capabilities, but I am well enough versed in the aircraft to be able to assess how it's going to perform at its maximum potential. The MC-202 was not an aircraft that I could do that in. It's actually taking me significantly longer than normal to get accustomed to this aircraft, and it took me a little while to actually put a finger on what it was, what I was having an issue with. And once I did, I actually felt like a little bit of an idiot, if I'm entirely honest. Now, for those of you who are unaware how the Battle of Moscow Early Access works, it's being released inside of the Battle of Stalingrad, and once a month a new aircraft is becoming available. The first aircraft was the I-16, which I already have on channel. The MC-202 was the second aircraft, and the third aircraft that's only just been released is the P-40, which I'll be covering later on in the week. Now, the Battle of Stalingrad has 10 aircraft, 8 aircraft in its core package and 2 premiums that you can buy as an extra. The Battle of Moscow is going to have exactly the same thing, 8 core aircraft, 2 premiums. The MC-202 is one of those premiums. But of course, only 3 of the Battle of Moscow aircraft are currently available in-game to fly against. So you have to fly against the aircraft from Battle of Stalingrad for testing purposes, and if you go into multiplayer, you will be fighting against the aircraft from Battle of Stalingrad, as the vast majority of people have those. Where's the problem? Well, the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Moscow didn't happen at the same time. During the Battle of Moscow, Germany's most advanced 109s were the Emil series, the E-series 109s. We're looking at E4s and E7s. During the Battle of Stalingrad, Germany's primary production fighter was the 109 F4, and it was in the process of being replaced with the early G-series. As you can see, there's a significant difference in performance there. And the same performance gap applies to the Russian aircraft in the Battle of Stalingrad that the MC-202 will be fighting. To put it bluntly, there was a reason why that while the MC-202 did actually partake in the Battle of Stalingrad, it was never used as a frontline fighter. It was used to escort Ju-52s and Heinkel 111s that were moving into the front lines. As the aircraft began to approach the front line, they were relieved of escort duty by 109s or 190s. She was just getting a little old at that point. Now, this is an issue when facing aircraft in the Battle of Stalingrad, but it won't be a problem with Battle of Moscow. As I said, you'll be flying alongside aircraft like the E-series 109s, the BF-110s. You'll be flying against aircraft like the very early Lags, and of course the I-16. In that environment, she will be one of the most powerful aircraft available in the game. However, testing her against the aircraft of Battle of Stalingrad has proved to be difficult. But regardless, let's go on and give you a look at what makes her tick. So first up, let's have a look at the modification options available for the MC-202. Now, the MC-202 comes standard with 2 Breeder 12.7mm machine guns with 800 rounds of ammunition. These guns are mounted in the engine cowling, and they're extremely good. They have an extremely high chance of setting things on fire. They are exceptionally accurate. They have a great amount of stopping force. I love the 50 caliber machine guns on the MC-202. Now, it has 2 other weapons options, as you saw, that are available. It has the option for 2 7.7mm machine guns. Unfortunately, the Breeder 7.7s are not that great. They do give you an additional 1,000 rounds of ammunition to fire at the target, but they don't add a lot of stopping power to the aircraft. It's worth maybe hosing a target down with 7.7s before lining up on the 50 cals, but I didn't find them to be that effective an option to take. Alternatively, you could fit 2 20mm MG151s in gun pods to the wings in the same position. Now, these add substantially more firepower to the aircraft. You only get 270 rounds of ammunition between the 2 guns. It's not a huge amount, but these things will stop anything. The catch is, of course, like almost all German pod-mounted weapons, they significantly alter aircraft performance. Overall, the acceleration and top speed of the aircraft seems to be about the same with the gun pods on, but climb rate is significantly dropped. Overall maneuverability, the plane feels really heavy in rolls. I found it's much easier to flat spin with the pods fitted to the aircraft as well. There's also 2 bomb options available, either 2 50 kilo bombs or two 100 kilo bombs mounted under the wings in a pylons exactly where the gun pods would sit. You cannot carry the extra weapons and the bombs at the same time. You have to make your choice based on the mission profile. The only extra modification that you can fit regardless is an armoured windshield. And I strongly recommend you use that armoured windshield option, especially if you're going hunting for Soviet ground attackers and Soviet bombers. So what about engine startup? Well, the MC202 follows the designs for the BF109. Almost all of its engine management systems are completely automated. You don't have to handle anything, even on full sim controls. The sole exception to this is the cooling systems. You still do have control over the radiator and the oil cooler, so you have to remember to monitor those in flight. Generally, I open the cooling systems to around 80% for engine start, keep them at 80 as I taxi out to the runway. As I go for takeoff, open them both to 100, and once I've leveled out and am off the runway, I dial them both back to 50, and at that point everything is pretty much under control for the most part. Now, this wasn't a particularly smooth takeoff, but it does serve as a great example. First things first, you have manual control over the lock for the tail wheel. Make sure the tail wheel is always locked before beginning to try and take off. The second thing you need to remember is the MC202's wings are not the same length. The left wing is slightly longer than the right wing to account for engine torque. Now, at high speeds and at flight speeds, this doesn't matter. It's designed to operate this way. But because the left wing is slightly longer than the right wing, during takeoffs and maneuvers at stall speeds, the plane will have a tendency to roll right, and you would have seen that on the takeoff just then. As the wheels first started to lift off the ground, because the left wing is generating slightly more lift than the right wing, the plane immediately wanted to go right wing down. Now, it's exceptionally easy to counter this out. It only takes a very small amount of left-hand aileron roll, and the plane will take off perfectly smoothly. However, if it catches you unexpected or you're not quick enough doing it, it will continue through, you will wing strike, and you will destroy your aircraft on takeoff. In combat, when versed against equivalent aircraft, the MC202 is an interesting plane to fly. In stock trim or with the 7.7mm machine guns fitted, the aircraft is able to make its historical 18 metre a second climb rate, and it can maintain that till about 3 kilometres. Once you pass the 3 kilometre point, the climb rate does begin to drop off a little bit. However, the aircraft is still capable of making its historical 11 kilometre maximum altitude. In flight and combat, the aircraft seems to be most comfortable flying at around 500 to 600 kilometers an hour, which fits with its historical numbers. However, I have managed to push the aircraft out past 780 kilometers an hour before in a dive and managed to pull out, although it's worth noting that did result in me doing light damage to the engine and bending both my wings. With the 20mm MG151s fitted, it's a totally different story. Climb rate is closer to between 11 and 12 meters per second. Climb rate starts dropping out at about 2.5 kilometers, and I've never managed to successfully take the aircraft above 8 kilometers with the gun pods fitted. Aircraft performance with the gun pods fitted seems to be more comfortable flying and manoeuvring at between 400 and 550. Although achieving the same speeds as the stock aircraft is entirely possible, the acceleration does seem to take a little bit of a hit here. As I mentioned earlier in the video, roll rate also takes a hit with the gun pods on, as does elevation authority, although that is far less noticeable. Now, the MC202 does perform at its best at altitudes in excess of 5 kilometers. It really does like to fight up there in the sky. However, you will find yourself fighting regularly at sub 3 kilometers, even down to 2 kilometers, as that's the altitude that the majority of the Russian fighters that you will be fighting against prefer to fly at. At this altitude, the MC202 still holds a significant performance advantage over aircraft like the I-16 and the LAG-3, which you can see me fighting here. However, be wary of Yak series fighters, the LA-5 and the P-40 if you encounter it. These aircraft, especially the Yak and the LA, perform much better than the MC202 at these altitudes. At these altitudes, these aircraft are at their optimal, and as such, you are at a significant risk when engaging them. The fight you're currently watching, I'm flying at the MC202 with the 20mm gun pods fitted, and there was a couple of other things that I noticed with the gun pods themselves. First things first is convergence is very important with these guns. If you are just inside or outside of your convergence range, these guns will almost never hit the target. It is incredibly difficult to get them on. The second thing is because they hang so low below the wings, they tend to fire at an altitude that is lower than the leading marker for your gun sight. So you need to give slightly more elevation to the guns than you would expect you would need to. The third thing is one of the primary rounds on the 20mm MG151 cannon is an armor-piercing round. It's effective on ground targets, it's effective against bombers. But it's not particularly effective against extremely light fighters, unless you can find a nice solid area to hit. I recommend aiming for the central fuselage whenever you're carrying 20mm cannons and engaging fighters. Give the shells as much meat as you possibly can for them to dig into, otherwise it's highly likely they're just going to pass through the aircraft, doing minor amounts of damage at best. However, when these shells do land home, as you can see here, putting a 20mm shell straight into the back of a Lag 3's engine block, the damage it generates is monstrous. The pilot did manage to keep the aircraft in the air for slightly longer than I anticipated, but he was not getting it back home. The aircraft was constantly falling towards the earth, and it was only a matter of time. At this point I was just wasting ammunition on him. While successfully hitting a critical component on an enemy fighter does result in a quite spectacular death, I actually recommend the 7.7s as the better alternate weapon option to fit to the 202 for anti-fighter operations. Of course, that is only anti-fighter operations. When it comes to anti-attackers or anti-bombers, the 20mm are almost a must-have. The performance drop you suffer from when you fit the MG151 pods doesn't really matter when you're engaging ground attackers and bombers, as you're always going to be the more agile aircraft, you're always going to be the faster aircraft, and you are always going to have the higher climb rate. In an anti-attack or anti-bomber role, the only thing that matters is your stopping power. The 7.7s simply do not have enough stopping power to be able to put down something like an IL2 with reliability, unless you manage to put those shots in exactly the right point. The plane is just going to ignore them, and the same thing goes for the Peshka. With the MG151 pods fitted, completely different game. Just put it in your gun sights and pull the trigger. Every round will cause crippling damage until the aircraft goes down. I have found even with the MG151s fitted that IL2s seem to be able to absorb a phenomenally large amount of damage before suffering a structural failure and falling apart in flight. The important thing to recognise when engaging IL2s is that you can perform killing levels of damage that will cause them to fall out of the sky without the plane actually coming apart, although they usually come apart quite nicely once they hit the ground. Taking out Peshkas does seem to be much easier, although it does come with significant risk. Peshkas have a lot of rear gunners, and this is where that armoured front panelling comes into play. If you look at the front of the aircraft, you'll notice the thickness of the glass. That is the armoured panel that has been fitted, and in a few moments you're going to see why it's fitted. Now, this particular battle was taken from the Wings of Liberty server. It's a multiplayer full simulation server, and this Peshka was actually returning back behind Soviet lines after a successful attack run on the German train station on the map. Now, the pilot of this particular aircraft was pretty good. He was flying that Peshka like a fighter, but the Peshka is a very large target and does have a lot of fuel in those wings, so it only takes one good hit in just the right area. Although, having said that, the same can be said in return. His tail gunner ricochets shots off my armoured glass panelling and into my front right hand side window, smashing it, but in return I sunk several 20mm shells into his right hand wing and specifically the back of the engine and the fuel tank, lighting his right engine on fire, setting the internals of the wing on fire, and as you can see, he's going down rather quickly. And that is the trick to taking out Peshkas with the MC202 with cannon pods on board. Aim at the back of the engine nacelles, you'll hit the engine and the fuel tanks in the wing, and the damage is almost always devastating. Landing the MC202 is also incredibly easy. As you line yourself up for finals, just drop the landing gear, give it about 20 seconds to fully deploy, line yourself up on landing, drop your flaps down to about 65%, back the throttles off to about 30% till you hit about 200 meters, and then back them off to idle and let yourself glide in on the flaps. Remember, as I said at the start of the video, be aware that as the plane approaches stall speed, it will begin to try and roll to the right, so always have a little bit of left aileron to counter that. Gentle flare at about 30 meters, and it should touch down rather smoothly. If it happens to bounce on initial touchdown, don't worry, the suspension in the MC202 is incredibly durable, and the aircraft itself does have a tendency to bounce on landing anyway. Providing you're at or near on correct landing speed, it shouldn't cause you any problems. So anyways, ladies and gents, that has been my first impressions of the MC202 for IL2, the Battle of Moscow Early Access. It's probably not a plane that's going to be completely my cup of tea, but it's most certainly not a bad one. We'll take another look at it once there's a few more planes for it to fight from the Battle of Moscow and see how it performs. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.